There we go. So I'm gonna probably mute today. And if I hear something going on, then I'll come back in, but
Does it hurt to talk?
not really. Just my voice is just really bad.
Yeah.
So, and I've been drinking tons and tons and tons of water.
Okay.
So all I
Did you have cold symptoms?
no, just flu symptoms. Yep. So what it is,
Get exhausted when you have the flu. I remember just getting up from the sofa to walk into the kitchen, which isn't far. I was wiped out just making myself a cup of tea.
yeah, exactly. In fact, I may do that right now. I'm gonna make me some tea. I'll
Okay.
be back.
Okay. Where's my phone? Here it is.
Come on, dude. Yeah. It's not time yet. You got an hour and a hour and 15 minutes.
Now you're going.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All right.
I have to get a sweater.
Hi, Dana.
Hi, Steve. How you feeling?
Not so good. Still have a fever and it goes up and down, up and down.
You
It's
don't
not
look
fun.
bad.
Not fun at all.
You don't look too bad.
No, I don't look too bad, but I don't feel good.
Um,
Let's see. Pam is not going to be on today. She's got internet problems.
Hi, Donnie.
Hi, Donnie.
I don't know if she can hear us. Okay. I was at the posse had a security briefing
I
this morning.
heard. I heard.
Okay, I'll be back in a couple minutes.
Okay.
I just got an email and I forwarded it to my son. Tom Horn, Arizona.
The representative, isn't he?
Yeah, he's at Board of Education or something in the state.
Yeah.
He is telling the schools not to use Amnesty or UNICEF materials because there's anti-Semitic content in it.
Really?
Yeah, I thought that was.
UNICEF has always been supported by the Jewish
The
community.
UN has not been supportive of Israel this past.
No, I knew that. I knew that.
This is part of it.
Oh,
ever,
Yeah.
ever,
oh,
not just now.
Well, obviously now, okay. Yeah, so because we've been talking about it, he and my son, David and I back and forth, and so, where is it? Here.
no more,
State Superintendent of Education, that's what he is.
yeah,
Um, to speak about anti-Semitic materials provided, Tom Horn, at school event, Horn warned schools to avoid using UNICEF and Amnesty International materials on campus. He called the materials anti-Semitic and anti-American.
wow.
And then I read the article that came with it, but was quite long when you all walked away. So that was aggravating.
Has survived.
Everything is aggravating on the news now.
Donnie, can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you hear
Good.
me?
Yes,
Yep.
ma'am.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
We can.
Can you hear the bird?
Not yet.
What
Not
kind of
yet.
bird is it?
She's a conure.
Oh. They're very pretty birds.
Yeah, she's one of the sunburst yellow with the red.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Now I hear her.
Steve, what book does this actually come out of? The Parashat?
It comes out of the Harvey Fields,
Oh,
a Torah commentary for our time.
okay, okay,
By Harvey, I keep saying Harvey.
Harvey,
Fields.
okay.
Harvey J. Fields.
yeah, and you can get it used probably through Amazon.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so
Also, if they don't have it, there's what is it? Is it abe.com?
Yes. I've never gotten
ABE.
anything from them.
I did, but AB, because sometimes they don't have these. They're sold out for whatever
Right.
reason. And the used copies are like brand new.
right.
Okay.
Don't worry about it.
They're really designed for bat mitzvahs.
Yeah.
Oh,
Kids.
The name
And
is
so it's a little more elementary, which is right on our level.
And so
yeah.
when kids get done with their portion, then the
They
parents.
don't need the books anymore.
Cool.
Right.
Yeah, they're about $7.
I'll have to look into that then, so I can write in it.
But I was $4. It depends,
No, there's
but,
4 books.
yes, there's
Books.
3 books.
Oh, this is the book that the rabbi was talking about.
Yes.
Where there was one book for each. Okay.
Right. There's 3. I have 3.
Yeah, there are 3. He's forgot. There were 3 books, and this is volume 1, and then there's 2 and 3. This is just Genesis. Okay.
And then volume 2 is Exodus and Leviticus, and volume 3 is Deuteronomy.
Uh-huh.
Oh. So those are the files that you sent me. The
Yeah,
whole file.
that's all the book.
So
Oh,
some-
okay.
You don't need to buy it.
No, you sent it to me.
I know.
Is it right side upside now?
Well, it is now, yeah. Yeah.
I
Had to flip the whole
couldn't
thing.
do it on my Mac. I couldn't get it to rotate.
Yeah, I had to use my PC.
Yeah,
It
I
would
got so
flip on my Mac.
frustrated, so that's why I wound up buying them. But I know when I was helping Miriam Herschel buy the book at the time, and some of them they just weren't available. That's why we went back and forth between. I switched her to abe.com and she got it that way.
Hmm.
And oh, welcome back.
Got her.
Marcia, how is Miriam?
I heard she's doing good. I haven't seen her in forever.
No, I haven't either.
Mary Gill said she was doing well.
At home, or is she someplace?
I don't know. I gotta think about that if I remember. I hadn't heard that she moved.
You moved?
I hadn't heard that. So
Oh.
I don't know. I'll
Oh.
find out. I'll ask around.
I forgot what we were there
My
for.
phone is-
She had a stroke, didn't she?
Hello?
Well, that's why I was wondering, because I hadn't seen her, and then it was after
Oh,
service.
that was an email that
They
came.
was
through the
at the ONEG, and someone was pushing her in a wheelchair.
Right, right.
And I said hello, and mentioned that I missed seeing her, and she looked at me like she didn't know who I was. So I was wondering what may have happened.
Draco, come back. Sorry, my pug has escaped.
You have a pug too?
A pug and a chihuahua, and
my
we did
gosh.
have a mini dachshund, but we had to put him to sleep last week.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was
Not
my
fun,
goodness,
not
that was
fun to
hard.
do that. It's not fun.
No, that's why I wasn't at service. I guess it was 2 weeks now. Yeah,
You were there last week?
yeah, it was 2 weeks ago.
Okay, 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Wow.
So the portion today would have an effect on you and the loss of your pet.
yes, the grief in general, and I just after the class on Monday, yeah, I don't know what it was about Monday's class on what was the class on a Monday? It was on
Music and prayers.
yeah, the
We were
Shabbat
talking about
prayers and the
Shalom
songs.
Aleichem what was the other one? Don Kadoni, I think. Yeah, the two prayers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know why it spoke to me
I'll leave
so.
a little early because I had another appointment and I won't be able to come on Wednesday. I think it's Thursday.
Tomorrow.
Because I have another appointment that conflicts with that. But he said he's going to video it. So
That's not the one about the Sabbath, is it?
yeah, well, it's
Mm.
not. Yes, well, it's about the Sabbath prayers. Well, not
Right.
what the prayers mean.
But there was a class that was gonna be on how to conduct a service.
That's not the
Oh,
one.
that wasn't the same
That
one.
was the one.
Okay,
But we're gonna make you attend and you're gonna have to do it. That's what he
I've
said.
done it, actually.
Marcia's gonna have to do it.
I did do it.
Draco, come back.
I could not do it.
Well, we used to have lay services in the summer. And I'm sure, probably, Bernie, have you done it in the summertime? Done a lay service and such?
That was a number of years ago when we had
Yeah, it was quite a while ago, pre-COVID.
that pre-COVID. It was held in the chapel, wasn't it?
Yes, and we took turns. They were only a half an hour. There was no Torah, reading from the Torah at that point, and so it was very simple, minimal order of the
And
service.
no one gave a speech.
We had to do,
sermon.
we did do the Parsha, whoever was conducting it
Draco,
on
come on.
the Parsha of the week, yeah.
Well,
We had Beverly playing the piano at that time. And she wanted me to sing, and I said, I can't sing. We had a big argument. Finally, she allowed that I didn't sing.
Crazy. She is a funny lady.
Yeah, she's very, very nice lady, too.
Yep. Shall we get Rabbi?
oh,
Hi, it's I.
Hi, Cy.
Good to see you. You got your bandage off.
yep.
I got mine
Okay.
on now. It's a slow healer. Anyway, I won't be participating because I've got the flu and I have a severe cough. So I don't want to disrupt you guys. So if we can go ahead and start with the blessings, and then I'm going to mute. And then if there's any issues, then I will come back in. So let's go ahead and start together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher yisrael blessed
are you,
God,
ruler
ruler
of
of the world, who
Sanctified
has sanctified us
your command.
and
command.
has us to gain the words of the Torah.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Good morning, everyone, and we want to wish
Mm.
a speedy recovery to Steve Siegel, our fearless leader. And even though he is got all sorts of forms of the flu, look at him, he's up in fighting shape, and he's working for the food bank. And I was corresponding with a friend in Cuba, and she says to me, I said something about Steve Siegel's activities in the food bank, and she said, "What's a food bank? Is that like a money bank?" So that was quite interesting. So welcome to all. We are on a very unfortunate subject, which is mourning the death of a loved one, which you can find on page 55. And it's a very short chapter. So a lot of what we talk about today is going to have to come from us. And one of the realities of life that we have to deal with is death. And so, like probably most of you, when I was little, I found out about death. I remember going to my grandmother's funeral when I was about 11. And so I knew that people died, but it was old people, and I was a child, and children don't really die, so it's not something I had to worry about. And so it didn't really affect me. But eventually I got older and older and older. I don't know how that happened. I have made a booking with Richard Bass to ask him as a doctor, how is it that I've continued to get older, and why he and his colleagues cannot do anything to stop that process. But this is the result. And we also, of course, know about illness, and that some of us are lucky and some are less lucky and some are even less lucky. So some of us get an illness at a young age, which might kill us but doesn't. And some of us get an illness at a young age, which does kill us. And some of us are able to go into older age without any of these terrible things. But we know that eventually it's going to hit us. And there's no way to avoid that. And that's something that all people share in common, rich or poor or whatever, doesn't matter. At some point, we're going to die. And some people are afraid of death, and some people are afraid of dying. And some people are afraid of just getting infirm, where you have no control over things. You're stuck in bed, maybe for years. So all of this is very, very unpleasant. And but there's no way really around it. And the topic here is Sarah dies and Abraham has to mourn her. So she's passed away. She's not worried about anything anymore, as far as we know. And now, as you know, in the Bible, the Bible is a text that, according to scholarship, was put together by at least 4 different groups, and they have different perspectives on things, and they may mention those perspectives, but it's not a book that gives you chapter by chapter what is our view on X. So it's not like you can turn to chapter 32. Everything that Judaism believes, or biblical Judaism believes, about death and dying and mourning, it's not like that. So you might find a story here, a statement here, and maybe you find it, maybe you don't. The Talmud likewise doesn't give you, they're interested in halacha, they're interested in practice, they're not interested in organizing systemic approaches to belief. So this all leaves us not always able to give comprehensive answers, which is a benefit and a deficit. It's a benefit because it allows us to be more flexible. We do not have in writing exactly what we have to believe. Therefore, we can evolve our beliefs. It's a deficit because, it's not always so clear. So that's my opening comments. I mean, I could talk a lot more, but I don't want to upset you and depress you and shock you and confuse you any more than you may already be. So I think, does everybody know Dawnie?
Hi.
So Dawnie has been participating in our congregation for a certain amount of time. She is a very pretty, before your actual picture came up, you had a cart, like a drawing. You'll have to tell me later how you made that, because that would be really neat. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Me? Introduce myself?
Mhm. Yeah, just, you know all these people that you see?
I know Steve. Hi, Steve. Yeah, I think he's the only one I've actually met though, in person.
Okay.
Well, other than you, of course.
So there's Minya, there's Liz.
Hi.
Liz, wave. So
Hello.
that's Dawnie. And there's Richard, who's got this beautiful African sunset behind him. There's Bernie from Colorado. There's
Oh.
Shirley from Alabama. Shirley, wave. Can you hear us, Shirley? Yeah, there she goes. There's Donna. There's Cy. There's Minya. And there's Marcia.
Hi.
And did I introduce
Yeah.
everybody? Okay. So opening thoughts about anything that I said or anything written, Richard.
Aging may be related to the shearing and destruction of the telomeres on the chromosomes. And you're going to say, what is that? Telomere is the filaments at the end of the chromosomes that help align the chromosomes with each other. As we age, they seem to be slowly being destroyed. So that's one of the theories.
So if you could fix the chromosomes and keep them shiny and glossy, you might be able to slow down aging.
Right, and there's also changes in the genes as they change and do stuff and cells divide. There's errors that occur within the gene system, which is inevitable. And some of these lead to further degeneration and cancers.
So, but even if you could solve this technical problem, death is part of life. So
Right.
if you don't
Right.
have anyone dying and you have people being born, the world would very quickly become totally overpopulated. And judging from both America and Israel, the politicians would live for hundreds of years and they would never relinquish control.
Right.
You know, no, I mean, look, we got, how old is Trump and Biden? They're both
70s and
80.
80s.
Close
They're
to
they're both coming on 80, which is not old for, you know, the Sun Cities, but it's to be a president at that age, you know, you're supposed to play golf and retire and go for breakfast and, you know, do the things that Cy Perlis does, you know. But to be president, Cy, do you want to be president?
No, I don't think so. Not in today's world. I liked it when Washington was president.
Okay, so, but you know, so you know, this would bring some terrible problems if people were able to live to 200, 300 years of age or more. You know, social problems. Okay, other comments, opening comments about mourning the death of a loved one and death. Marcia.
Well, somewhere along in this the Perek Aleph, it talks about sharing grief with others, and I guess this is the purpose of funerals, is to it makes it easier for the person who is bereaved to talk to other people and that he's friends with that knew that person even, and to share their memories. It kind of, it's a transition, a means of transition to accepting it, I think.
Is that where it comes from then? As living in Israel, we did this was always done, that for a week afterwards, people paid their respects to the family. The family had drinks and cookies and something like that, and you sat and
Right.
you discussed the person and
Right.
sometimes learned a lot about the person that you didn't know before.
Right. There's a lot of things, a lot of people walking around and they just say hello and you don't know, that they had all these things that they'd done in their past or that had happened to them or all sorts of stuff. But yeah, the Donna's referring, of course, to Shiva
Yeah,
from
sitting
the word
Shiva.
seven. So Shiva doesn't mean anything fancy, it just means seven, referring to the 7 days immediately following burial. And in the halakha, you observe that following the funeral service. So when the person dies and they're not buried yet, that's a liminal stage. You're not yet in Shiva until the burial or until the memorial service. And of course, was anyone at the memorial service yesterday? We had for Fern Bencover. So we had a very large memorial service. It was large. We had more people there than on Yom Kippur, which is not a good thing necessarily, but it's a fact. And, it was very sad, and she died of pancreatic cancer, which is one of the most fatal forms of cancer even today. And that's what killed our president, John Werble, as well. Yes, so yes, and so coming together in a funeral service, and then tonight they're having prayers at the family's house. It's a way to mourn with the family. It's good for the family to see support, but it's also a way for friends and acquaintances who are not family to express their sadness as well. So thank you, Donna. That's a good comment. So in this case, we're talking about Sarah is dying. The name of the parsha is Chaye Sarah, which means the life of Sarah, but this parsha starts out with her dying. So it's a certain irony. And the Midrash says that she died in shock because of the almost sacrifice of Isaac. So in the traditional rendition, the sacrifice of Isaac's story or the binding of Isaac's story ends in a positive way. Abraham is told by the angel, do not kill your son. But in the Midrash, it says the Satan was live streaming it to Sarah, literally. And he was trying to make trouble. And so he live streamed it. So when Sarah saw Abraham lift up the knife to kill Isaac, she had a massive heart attack and died. And then after that, the angel said, don't kill Isaac. But Sarah, who was in another state, was dead from shock. Marcia.
So really, you're saying about the Sarah, does she visualize what was happening? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I guess she was told by Satan, Abraham's about to kill Isaac. He's got a knife.
Okay.
I mean, it wasn't live streamed, but she believed him.
Oh, I get it.
This is not in the Bible, is it? The Torah? This is sort of the Midrash.
Exactly. This is not.
Someone decided to make it up.
Yeah.
Someone in their imagination made something up, and now it's a part of the Jewish, folklore.
But it makes sense because Sarah dies right after the story about the sacrifice of Isaac. Now, of course, she was 127 years old. So, that was, she was elderly, so things happen. But the Midrash sees this as connected. The Midrash sees everything as connected. So that's the story with death, and the best we can do is mourn and just try to be friendly to each other and support each other. But it's not much consolation, really.
Can I?
Yes.
Can I be stupid about this? We've talked about it so much. Who wrote the Midrash?
The sages, the rabbis. So the Torah was put together. These four sources were put together maybe 500 BCE. And they'd been written for several hundred years before. Then we have the Persian and the Greek and the Roman periods. And during that time, there were still some biblical books being put together, but we're not really sure what happened. And then by the Roman period, you have the rabbis, and the rabbis write the Talmud and the Midrash. And they change a lot of stuff.
So the Midrash is immortalized on paper?
The Midrash was eventually written down. So there's different books of Midrash. There's Midrash Rabbah, there's Midrash Tanchuma, there's different Midrashic collections. But the main ones that we're talking about were all coming from the times of the rabbis, which started around the year after the destruction of the temple, say 70, and go on to as much as 500 or 600 CE. And the rabbis change a lot of things. For example, capital punishment is assumed to be allowed in the Bible. There's all these biblical things where you're executed. The rabbis decided they didn't like capital punishment, so they couldn't say the Torah's wrong, but they limited it so extremely that it could never be carried out. So that's an example where the rabbis totally disagree with the Bible, even though they don't.
What happens to the stories where capital punishment is actually happens? It happens with Moses. It happens with.
Well, the rabbis, would just tell those stories, but in terms of for their day, the rabbis would make capital punishment so restrictive that you could not really actually do it.
Like abortion.
Abortion, the rabbis, develop a policy which is in the middle, whereas the Bible doesn't seem to have much policy on it at all. Not too much. Yes, Dawnie.
At what point did the rabbis stop adding into the Midrash?
Well, that's a good question as well, and one that I can't answer totally. But there's different generations. So the early rabbis are called Tanaim, and the later rabbis are called Amoraim. So you have Midrashim and other rabbinic texts which are from the earlier period, Tanaim. Then you have rabbinic texts which come from the later period, which is after, say, 200 CE, or, which are called the Amoraim. Then after about 500 or 550, then you have the period of the Gaonim. So that's sort of post-rabbinic, but they're still rabbinic. Meanwhile, all the other groups that existed in Second Temple Judaism, such as the Sadducees and the Essenes, and, in the early stages, the Jewish Christians are Jewish, and many other groups that we don't know about, they all disappear pretty much. But underground, there may have been a little bit that continued. We don't know. And then around the year 600, 700, the Karaites come up. They pop out of nowhere, maybe, or maybe they were always there.
Those are the ones that do not follow the rabbis. They only follow the Torah.
Right.
Okay.
At least they claim to only follow the Torah, but the truth is that they follow basically their own rabbis. But they reject the rabbis that we know. So they reject the Talmud, they reject the Midrash. They they have their own system that's based more on the Bible, which makes sense because the rabbis, as I said, change a lot from the Bible, and they felt that who are they to do this? But most Jews were willing to follow the rabbis.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
so in terms of death, I mean, we'd have to investigate this, but the Karaites would follow more the biblical practices in death. And the rabbis added all sorts of new things. So, but in Reform Judaism, we follow what we find meaningful. So if the rabbis come up with a good idea concerning death and dying and mourning, we'll keep it. And if we don't think it's a good idea, we don't have to. So it gives us enough flexibility in normal circumstances. But I tend to be a little bit hostile to the rabbis, that they just came in and they all the other groups disappeared, and they didn't copy any of the other books. So all of the Jewish literature from before the destruction of the temple disappeared from Jewish life for 2,000 years. We've recovered a lot of it because it was saved by the Christians, but whatever the Christians didn't save, is gone, unless they found it either in the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Cairo Geniza. And some books, for example, Philo, was out of Jewish culture for 2,000 years, and now he's back because the Christians saved it, and we now have it in English. So Philo, almost all of Philo is still available to us now. Yes, Sai.
Within the framework of the thinking of the Torah, are all deaths considered in the same light? We know when someone dies, they die, but there's a difference between someone living 121 years and passing away, and someone passing away from some illness at 32.
Right.
And I think that's a very, very important difference. And I'm wondering whether the religion makes any difference between those who have died, I call a very natural death. They just died because they're old, rather than their death because of an illness or an accident or a war or something similar to that.
Correct. I mean, there's a huge difference, and that's why, it's just. I mean, when I was in South Africa, I did a funeral for a 14-year-old boy whose father was drunk and was driving and didn't stop at a stoplight and got hit by another car. And the father was not injured at all, but the car hit on the passenger side and killed his son, who was 14. And he was a little league baseball star. And hundreds of kids from his school came to the funeral. It was the first time they'd known anyone, certainly in their age bracket, who had died. It was horrible.
How do you brace yourself? I mean, you've done many, many funerals. How do you keep yourself from becoming so personally invested or sad?
Well, sometimes you don't, so it's just very sad. That's why we've had 4 now in the last 10 days. So I'm pretty much I'm pretty much out of it. It's awful. So it's so how do you mourn? I mean, I guess it depends what you really believe. Like, I mean, I'll hear some people say, they're in a better place, but I don't know what that means. But if it makes them feel better, and certainly if somebody suffered for a long time, some people suffer terribly, and then death is certainly a relief. And of course, we don't let our pets suffer. If you have a dog and he's in agony and he's not going to get better, they put him to sleep. But we don't do that with people generally, unless you're in Oregon
Or
So-
Colorado.
or Colorado. But but And now why wouldn't that why would some religions oppose that? I mean, so in Judaism we believe there's in one view of Judaism we believe that we have a soul that was given to us by God when we are born, and that soul goes back to God when we die. And so but to go from that to say that only God can decide when you're going to die, well, that's just not the way it is. There's a whole cycle of nature, and some people just die slowly in great pain. Does God necessarily want them to suffer like that? And if their soul goes back to God a little sooner rather than a little later, is that going to upset God? I just don't see why that would be the case. But that's just my view. Okay, any other opening ideas? If not, then we'll read page 55, left column, Perek Aleph, mourning the death of a loved one. Do we have a volunteer who would like to read?
Menu will read.
Okay, Minya.
When someone we love dies, we experience deep sorrow. We miss that person's presence and caring. We miss the support and all that we shared. At times, we are angry and ask, why did that loved one have to die? At other times, we understand that death is something that happens to every living thing, but the pain is confusing. We find ourselves wishing to share just another day or a few hours so that we might say some things that we never found the time to say.
Okay. You find that to be true? I mean,
Yes.
Yes.
that there's people that you miss, and you just, if you could get them back for 10 hours, you could just talk a little more, and that would be somehow and it's just because you didn't have time to talk to them about certain things when they were alive, or just that you just want to continue a dialogue.
Everyday
Yeah.
life gets in the way and you don't think to do it, kind of thing.
And sometimes you would like to have them back to explain some pieces of history that was, like, for instance, for myself, that I would like to know more from my father and where he grew up, because I spent a little bit of time there. And so I would like to know more of the history of that area and where it was that he lived and what my grandmother did and so on and so forth.
Right. I mean, you would think that people would want to record some of the important information about their lives for their loved ones, but they almost never do that, and I don't quite know why. Yes, Richard.
I think this is a very common phenomenon. Myself, now that my parents are gone, gee, I could have asked them some questions, or why didn't I ask them more questions than I did? I look at it as when we're living, we're all in a big room and we can talk to each other. But when you die, all of a sudden you leave that room and you maybe can see the person for a short period of time, but you can't really touch him. You can't hear him because of the noise in the room, and it gets further and further away. And the fog of time then starts obscuring your view of that person. This is the way I feel about death. And yes, I feel that we mourn the person, and it gets less as we get older, away from the death, and we do other things. But yeah, I just like everybody else here. I would love to have thought, gee, why don't I ask my father and mother this?
Does who here has parents that are still living? Both parents, Liz, or one?
Yeah, both parents. And
Wow.
actually, my grandmother did a smart thing. She actually did record a lot of information that I have. She recorded everything she could remember about her
Wow.
family and, back in Russia. And she even included the town name that they're from, but in my research, I couldn't find any mention of it anywhere. I guess it's, in Russia near the border of Poland. But yeah, it's very neat to have that. I haven't looked at it in a while, so I should pull it out and look at it again.
Did you know your grandmother?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And so does that change how you feel about death?
Well, I mean, when my grandmother died, she was 91 or 92. I mean, at that age, you expect it.
Well, we have a
But I
lot of
do think,
Commons who are above that age. Cy is 102 and he doesn't want to go anywhere. He's quite happy being around here. So,
that's amazing. Yeah, but I think about, I'm lucky to still have my parents, but that's always a worry in the back of my mind because they're at that age where illnesses happen and other things.
Marcia?
I think as you're younger, a lot younger than most of us on the screen, we think differently about our parents and older relatives, aunts and uncles. And a lot of times I think we're so I'm not using you as, many people are very self-centered about, and my parents never shared with me. I don't know about the rest of you, but they never shared. A sentence or two would come up about their childhood. And unless I was really, into it and asked to continue the conversation, we didn't get any further. And
Right.
so I only have these snippets of what had happened, and so, but I probably didn't care back then. Now I care, to know what it was about, I think the maturity as we get older, we kind of we get to appreciate more about their lives,
Which
uh,
is why what Liz's grandmother did is so nice and so unusual.
very nice.
But I remember talking with Minya and others whose family were from Holocaust victims, and they didn't say anything. And this could be because of the Holocaust, but it could also be that adults tend not to go into the details of their lives with their children. So my father was in Korean War, and he told me a few snippets, just like you said, about being in Korea, then being in Japan. So I know that, he was a dentist in the near the where they were fighting in Korea, and then the war ended, and then he was in Japan, and he was in the South where it was very nice and warm, and then a dentist with more seniority wanted that job, so he got sent to the North where it was colder. And at some point, he had a Japanese girlfriend that maybe he almost married, and I could have been born like this. And that's all I know, basically because it just kind of came up in random ways. And so, obviously, it would have been better if I had interviewed him. Today we have phones with the video where you can any phone, you just point it at a person and press the button and you can video. Then you had to get a whole video camera and it was complicated. And I don't know, I was never able to get my act together in terms of doing that. So, yes, Marcia.
Remember, there was one memory I had. My mother said, I don't know why she said it, but she said she lived in Poland, which she said was sometimes Austria, Liz. That happens. The towns just switch country.
Yeah, yeah.
And she said the Russian soldiers were coming through, and her mother stuck her and a couple of her younger sisters, the little ones, into a cupboard in the closet and told them to be quiet because they didn't want the Russian soldiers to know these little girls were there. That was the conversation. I never said, well, then what happened, and well, how did this happen and why and all that stuff. So now I got this picture of what they went through with pogroms and such, but I really don't know anymore. And so, it's It's like you're in the middle of a story that just get left
Right.
hanging.
Right, right. So do you think that what here we find ourselves, we want to say things to our loved ones that we never found the time to say? I mean, is that something? I mean, Minya, do you miss your parents in that way where you wanted to say certain things to them that you never said?
I never asked questions, which is my biggest regret. My parents, especially my mother, felt that children were children and adults were adults, and you don't share your life or secrets with your children because they're still children no matter how old they are. As far as my parents, I would have loved to have asked a lot of other questions, but I was at a point when I was younger that I didn't want to cause them any more pain. I would have loved to have asked about their siblings. I know they had them and they were murdered and right after the war started. So I have a picture of them, so I know who they are, but I never asked any questions of them, so I don't know what they did. I would have loved to have known what their life was like in Poland. And like Marcia said, I was named after my grandmother, who was Russian, but Russia, at that point, that part of Russia could have been Poland. So it, I don't really know. And again, I didn't ask the questions. I was too concerned about hurting them to ask anything.
Ty,
It's an interesting question because I think it works both ways. I was in the war and I was in the Pacific. And when I came home, I don't think my mother and father, who they were alive, asked me two questions of what I did, or was one bit interested in what I did. All they were delighted about was the fact that I was home, period. Couldn't care less about what I did for 4 years. So I
wow.
think it works both ways.
So you were gone for 4 years. You didn't go home at once during that time.
That's right.
And you show up 4 years later and they just hug you and they say,
Yeah,
our
I
son
mean,
is
they didn't
alive.
just happy that I was home and never asked me any questions about what I did, what I was involved in, what I felt, or something like that.
Wow. And did that strike you as unusual at the time?
No, not at that time, because I was happy to be home.
So if you could talk to them now, were there things like it said in this paragraph that you would want to say to them that you never found the time to say?
Oh, I still wouldn't get involved about what I did or where I was or anything like that.
Hmm. Shirley, comments about this? If you could bring back people, would you say things to them that you never found the time to say? You have to unmute. You have to unmute. Shirley, you have to unmute. Unmute.
There
There
we
you
go.
go.
A couple of months ago, I lost a very good friend that I'd met here since I've been in Mobile. And I really never asked her questions. She was a photojournalist. She had radio stations and she was very good and she was gone in 2 months. But so I never even saw her while she was sick. And that's a shame. But before that, my mother was the youngest of her 7 siblings, and they came from Poland and Russia. And one day I realized that my aunt was the only one left with my mother, but she was much older than my mother. So I gave her a little tape recorder and I said, can you take this and just every time you think of something, doesn't have to be chronological or anything. Anytime you think of something from your background, just say it. And she gave it back to me a week later. She said, I can't do that. I cry every time I try it.
Oh,
So that was the end of giving of anything. That was the end of my family.
but it was interesting that you had the wherewithal to make the attempt,
I
but
tried.
it's
Yeah.
it's hard to get people, so there's all these spoken and unspoken barriers to communicating things. It's not just an accident that most of us know almost nothing. It's
Well,
psychological. And
they do.
so Yeah,
They
sorry,
didn't
Sharon.
really, they didn't really tell us, any of us, anything. I mean, there were a lot of people. They all came over on a boat. Took them 2 years. But they talked about the fact that they never knew what a banana was, so they ate it with the peel on and got sick. Just things like that that we heard about, but we didn't really hear any historical things other than they came into their house when they were in Poland, and the Russian soldiers or the Polish soldiers went upstairs, took their uncle, hung him in the attic, and left. That was the only one that I know of that was killed. But there was no reason for it. They just walked in the house and took him upstairs and killed him.
You had that same little story that I had in the middle of nothingness.
Yeah. But it's a shame because I really tried to get more information, but some of them were too old by that time. And then this one aunt couldn't do it. So it just kind of became just something that was it. And my mother was like 6 years old when they left, so she was too young to remember anything. I wish I had some information, but I don't.
Yes, Bernie.
My story is a little bit different. We actually sat my parents down with a video camera and started asking them questions. And it's amazing how little they knew about their grandparents,
Mm-hmm.
or were willing to tell us, I guess. And my
Kinda
son,
like that.
my son
I
took them
think
in the car while he was visiting, and they drove around Charleston, and he got them to point out the different places that they had lived in town and the stories associated with it. I have that recording, and it's on a disc, and I don't have any way to play the disc. So I gave them to my daughter, and she's going to digitize them, so I can download them to my computer.
Oh,
Yeah.
that'd be,
Yeah,
I think sometimes it was hurtful for them and they didn't want to remember. So all they said was, we don't remember.
Right, and in talking, they would have remembered and just
Right.
assumed for
and
I
these
don't- we would've-
hurtful things,
that they
of
saw.
course, oh, sorry, Donna.
I just said that they didn't want to remember the horrible things that they saw, and many of them did.
yeah. My parents really came before 1922, but I'm named after two uncles who were killed in the Holocaust. I know nothing about the uncles other than my mother said, "You're named after them." I don't know who they were. I didn't know my grandparents because they all died before I was born. But an interesting fact is, my mother's father, she thought was the most wonderful person in the world. He was the patriarch. He was this, he was that. When she got older and she got senile and she started having dementia problems, she had to be put in the hospital for a short period of time, and a psychiatrist saw her. And this psychiatrist sat and talked to me. He said, "Did you know your mother hated her father?" I said, "No, I did not know that." He said, "Because she married another woman right after her mother died when she was 5, number one. Number two, he pulled her out of school when she was 16 years old, made her work. She wanted to go to college." He said, and he never supported her after that. He said, she hated his mother, but she subliminated that until the point came that she could never control that sublimation, and it came back up into her brain, which is a very interesting finding.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
And
that's
there was a lot,
pretty powerful.
there was a lot of that then because a lot of the parents had very rigid ideas on children, on particularly the role of women. So for your grandfather, it made perfect sense to pull your mother out of school when she was 16. Like, what do girls need higher education for?
Right.
But we need an income. So for him, he was just following the standard, that's what everyone did.
Absolutely.
And so, he was just not an enlightened guy who could see like in the future and could, he was just rigid and following the perceived wisdom of the times.
Yep. He
So
was an Orthodox Jew. Yeah.
If you came to him and you said, look, you hurt your daughter so badly permanently, he'd say, what are you talking about? I did what
Right.
everyone else in my whole neighborhood did. Nobody wanted their daughters to go to college. It would be expensive. We needed her to work. That's what Joe did and Sam did and Elliot did. And, why are you blaming me? I didn't do anything different from anyone else.
Yep.
And how can she harbor any antagonism toward me? I was a perfectly good father. I did all the things that everyone else on the neighborhood did. I fed her, I took care of her, I made, etc. So it's a different perspective. It's very sad. You can hurt children so badly without, without any awareness that you're doing that. Donnie, this may be a little heavy to start with, but if you want to say something, please feel free. Donna.
Yeah, I just, as a student nurse, from 57 to 60, I was at a major university with a medical school. At that time, I think we had in our medical school year, we had 2 women that were in medical school, and it was a large school. Now, I understand there's at least half of the women or half of the graduates from medical school are women. So there's a lot. 1953, from my point of view, was not that long ago.
Donna, I remember something about that and about women. I was an intern at Northwestern University in 1968. It's when after I finished medical school. And I remember the women were told they had to wear dresses and their little hats. You remember wearing those hats?
Yeah.
And
The nurses did.
And the shirts in those days were very short. And they'd bend over, you see their rear end. They were very upset about that. But the administration said, you're a woman, this is what you're going to do. So all the women, particularly in the ICU, which was very new then, quit. I said, we're quitting. Bye. Whoa, what are you doing? Half the nurses quit. And all of a sudden, Mr. said, okay, you can take off your hats and you can wear pants if you want to.
Wow.
They were nursing
That
caps.
was a big change in Northwestern. After that, almost none of the girls, except for with this one nurse who was an exchange nurse from New Zealand, she wore her skirt and her cap.
Yeah.
Nobody other nurses would do that because
Yeah.
they saw it was much more advantageous to wear pants with pockets in them so they could put stuff in them and take that hat off, which was interfering with how they functioned. So you're right. Perceptions were very important. And as you say, in that day, women were not worth much, particularly for school. One of my uncles went to school. All the girls didn't go to school.
So I want to keep the conversation dealing with death, unfortunately, which is our topic. And the next paragraph is a one-line paragraph. Death is so final, we can't turn back the clock. And I've heard people say this after, funerals. And, I remember one particular person a few months ago saying to me, it's so final. I can't believe that she's gone. It's so final. And he just kept repeating, it's so final. It's so final. And you can see from that why you would want to develop a belief in the life after death, right? So it's much more comforting to think of that our soul, including our personality, goes up to heaven. And when we die, we return and we can reunite with the people that we cared about and reminisce. And we can tell them what went on if we want to, or maybe the way Sai's parents greeted him after the war. They can just re-embrace and they won't really care what happened, but you'll be together again and you'll feel so death is seen as so final. Marcia.
I remember not too long ago being someone, well, it was Harvey Melman that I had been seeing for years. His son was dying and his daughter was in the room and the lights flickered and she said, "Oh, that's mom. You know, she's, you know, looking over Russell and she's waiting for him and et cetera, et cetera." And I guess it made her feel good that their mother was waiting for the dying son. Okay. And you know, even as pragmatic as I am about things, you want to believe in the life after death, because it makes you feel a little better, you know? And I think that that's a big reason that we do believe in heavens and hells and whatever, you know, the stories are, because it gives us a little comfort. You know, even though we know the probability may not be there, it still makes us feel better to think it might be, you know. So I think does the Torah or Midrash discuss life after death?
Yeah, well, in different places, yes, but not in one place. And different rabbis and different books of the Bible have different approaches to it, you know, and so there's no one view. And then,
We
of course,
talked a bit about it before.
Jewish mysticism as well.
Yeah.
Okay, who'd like to read back to you, Minya? That must have been the sadness.
You know, you're muted.
You have to unmute.
Thank you. That must have been the sadness Abraham felt when Sarah died. They had shared so much together. In his grief, he must have remembered the close call with death they had both experienced with Abimelech, or how upset Sarah had been when she could not become pregnant. He must have recalled how much she loved their son Isaac and how jealous she had become of Hagar and Ishmael. They had been partners for so many years. He would miss her. Little wonder that Abraham wept and mourned for Sarah. Abraham must have also realized how helpful it was to share his grief with others who were there to comfort him. Talking and weeping with friends is healthy when we lose a loved one. Friends can support us and ease our loneliness and pain. So can the rituals and customs of Jewish tradition.
Skip the box for the moment.
Okay. Jewish rituals and customs at the time of mourning are meant to help us face death realistically and to find comfort with friends. Jewish tradition helps us understand that death is not the end, but that our loved ones continue to live in the memories and influences they leave behind.
All right, stop. Okay, so Abraham had a rough time, and Sarah had a rough time. They almost got killed a couple times, and Sarah, of course, couldn't become pregnant for many, many years. And then, according to the Midrash, she actually dies of a heart attack because of what Abraham almost did. So there was a lot. There was a love, but there was also a certain antagonism. I'm sure if Sarah was here, she would be spilling her guts and saying how she hated Abraham in some senses. But death kind of puts an end to the ambiguity, you know, the love and the hate, and then it just comes to an end one day. And comments about Abraham and Sarah. Donna.
And just what you said, it comes to an end of this love and hate. And I want to throw in there that I think because some of us do always, growing up with parents, you have to have some not good feelings about them. Oh, they do this, did that, and I should be able to do this, and they say no. And going back, sometimes these things come out in memories, and there's a lot of guilt feelings that can occur because of this. Or at least I had felt them, and I loved my parents dearly. But I can remember thinking, I wish I hadn't said that to them, or I wish I had acted better, or whatever.
Yeah, well, we all have that sense. It's like, but that we acted the way we thought was reasonable to act at the time. Sai, Liz? Liz, is that a yes? You want to speak or a no?
Oh, no, I'm just thinking. Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems normal that as you get older, so many things start to make sense to you. Maybe things your parents did that at the time you didn't like. And then you find yourself acting like them in many ways, which is always surprising. But the thing about parents not talking or, telling about what happened, to me, I guess that seems really, really common in Jewish culture, because I can say the same thing. I mean, my dad has specifically told me that his parents just never told him much about anything. And there was that just similar relationship of them, even, when he was away in college and whatever, of them hardly even talking to each other. He said maybe we talk to each other once a month on the phone, which, seems strange. But I find myself doing the same thing. I don't want my son to know all of the bad things that happen in my life, or, you know, other family members did. I want him to try to have a positive view of them as much as possible. So I think in some ways I do the same thing.
So if you have an aunt that came to your wedding and refused to give you a wedding gift, you don't want your son to know about that because it'll unnecessarily prejudice his view of this aunt for no positive, it doesn't do any useful purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of worse things like, my mom was an alcoholic, and everything that came along with that. I mean, I've told him in a very general sense, but there's a lot of details that I don't want him to know, because I want him to at least try to have some kind of relationship with them, or positive thoughts and feelings.
And does knowing too much about the negatives make it harder to carry on a relationship?
I think it can be. I mean, my mother's parents were very abusive in many ways, and she just told me that as a kid, straight out. And I think it did kind of fog I don't know, my feelings towards them, or I was very aware of that. And I mean, she felt she had to tell me, I guess, so I kind of understood some things, or maybe the way their relationship was at the time.
Your knowledge of that, did that impress you enough that you never wanted to follow her in that way?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I would hate for my son to have to experience those types of things. Yeah.
And how does any of this connect to death?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, even though, my grandparents obviously are no longer with us, so I think maybe sometimes, I don't know, it seems to me that after someone dies, especially years after, and you're older, you kind of remember the good things, or, like I have my grandmother's dishes, and they're in the china cabinet, and those I think bring good memories. And you take them out for the holidays, and you think about them. But yeah, you think you remember the better things, I think.
Anyone else? Bernie? Okay, Minya, you want to read more?
Okay. This healthy-minded approach of Jewish teachers through the ages provided not only beautiful rituals for the expression of grief, but also a warning that if we dwell too long on our loss, we embitter our hearts and harm ourselves and those around us, about us. In this regard, the Torah's description of Abraham's mourning for Sarah provides us with a very important model. His grief was not endless. Abraham did not stop functioning or taking on responsibilities. While his heart was filled with sadness, he knew that he had to accept her death and get on with the task of her burial and the challenges of his life.
All right, stop there. But of course, that would make a big difference whether the Midrash was true, that she really died of a heart attack because she had heard that he was about to sacrifice their son. Then he would be directly culpable in her death, which is very different than, oh, I went on a business trip and my wife died while I was away. So if he was responsible for her death, presumably he would feel guilty. And if he wasn't responsible for her death, then he would just feel sad that she's gone. And, I couldn't be there at the time. Comments, Richard, Shirley, Donnie?
But you're only going by the Midrash,
Mm-hmm.
right?
It's a
Yeah.
I mean, I would assume if this is the case in the Torah that she died of a massive heart attack, grief because of what was happening to her son Isaac, then I would think that we would see something different in the Torah reading, that Abraham would have far more grief and sorrow than he had, because he would realize that his action killed his wife prematurely.
Right. And so
They
you're expressing a certain skepticism toward the
I am. I think that the scholars, the rabbis, read a lot of their own feelings into the Torah, and
Yeah.
I'm sure with, I guess, with anything you do. I mean, we look at our Constitution, how they read, how people read it. They read it with their own feelings, their own political beliefs.
Donnie.
Well, I was just thinking, not having been raised as a Jewish person, that the death of my mother and guilt, she didn't raise me, but I got to know her as an adult. And when she got sick, the doctor called me and said, your mother's in the hospital and she won't let us treat her. And so I went, and they said, well, she's a Jehovah's Witness, she can't take blood. What do you want us to do? She has chosen you to be her. You have to make all the choices for her.
Mm.
And knowing her feelings about this, even though I was not a part of her religion, the guilt that she put on me as the one who had to tell them to let her die. She could have lived. I could have said, yes, give her the blood. And she would have been okay, but choosing to do what she wanted, even though it was not something that I wanted to do. So the guilt, I don't know if that actually ties in with Abraham and guilt in the Midrash, but
it ties in with the general subject for sure. I mean, clearly nobody should put somebody else in that situation, right? So if you don't want blood transfusions, you should have legal papers drawn up to say, I don't want blood. And so that you don't put your daughter in a situation where she has to make such a, It's just that's pretty horrible to put somebody in that situation. But people do that all the time because they don't want to face it themselves. So they leave all these loose ends for others, not fully thinking through, the implications, or not thinking through the implications, or not wanting to think through the implications. Donna.
Yeah, to ask Richard, do you think that they had the knowledge back then to think that something that they did could cause somebody else's death? Did they have the knowledge to, Richard, you're muted. If you're going to answer, I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway,
No, I don't, they didn't understand heart attacks until, gosh, well into the 19th century.
given
Early 20th century. So I would have doubted if in the early measures said she died of a massive heart attack. Because I don't think they understood that in those days. I mean, we're talking about Midrash is what, 2 CE? About
could
that?
he, could
300.
he still have connected the two together? That what he had done had caused her death.
Right.
Or what he almost did.
So even if the Midrash's story is true, quote unquote true, Abraham may not have connected his action to her death.
Right.
Yeah, Marcia.
Or the
People say you died.
Midrash, the rabbis who wrote the Midrash portion about her death have misconstrued that she died of natural causes other than the grief of her, the possible death of her son.
She died of a broken heart, is what I was going
Died
to
of a broken heart, right? That was a very common phrase, died of a broken heart.
And there's such a
That
thing.
could very well have been that he really thought that he had caused her death.
Well,
Now
I see stress, your broken heart, you're so stressed that it increases the endorphins and the epinephrine in your bloodstream and causes tachycardia. And if you have a damaged heart to begin with vessels that are plugged, then the extra amount of force that's occurring in the heart will cause a heart attack.
But he had that understanding that he may have, whatever reason, that he may have caused her death because of what he almost did.
Marcia.
He made a very big deal out of her burial site and making sure that he had paid for it, that it was totally free and clear. He didn't want anybody to give him the land, for the funeral, remember all that part. And maybe that was sort of overcompensation at that point, because he realized the stress that he had put Sarah under, could well have been.
Now the Harvard Fields here says how rituals can help you to cope with grief. And then he lists all the different rituals: the symbolic cutting of a garment, the comforting mourners, the Shiva candle, the Kaddish, the Yizkor. Has anyone found here that any of these rituals or other rituals, any rituals, personal rituals, that can actually provide comfort for, getting over someone who's passed away? Richard?
Well, I think certainly the sitting Shiva, I think that is a very important ritual. I think it would be a ritual, not a personal.
That's a ritual, yeah.
And I just remember myself after Lois died, how lonely I felt. And then after the service, a lot of people came over and we just started talking, just had a lovely time. I mean, people spent like 5 hours at the house, munching and talking about life and everything else other than death. So, and it helped. And I still remember that. And going to other shivas of people who've died, how it helped them. I think that's a very important aspect of our religion.
The rituals can help in dealing with death, dealing with other crisis situations, sadness, or feelings of being threatened. Other people, has ritual, Jewish or otherwise, helped with anything. Yes, Marcia.
I know that when my son died quite a while ago, at a relatively very early age, I thought, 31, that at the funeral, and you stirred on the coffin at the end, and I made sure I was the last one to do that, and it was like a whole weight came off my chest when I did that. It was like the closure of it all. He was sick for 5 years with cancer, and that closing last thing made such it made a difference. I would never have thought it would have, but it made a difference to me. It made a difference that it was an end to that chapter of his life, of my life, and we did those rituals. Keep you busy, they keep you going during a really hard time, and I think it makes a big difference.
And I think afterwards, whether they come during the week after the burial, or whether they just come individually at different times, that it's a comfort to know that there were people there that cared, that they cared enough for your child or your parent, and they cared enough for you.
Yeah.
Bernie? Cy, Liz, comments about ritual and whether any of that has helped in either death or in other crisis situations?
Well, I think that what we do is not unusual. It's a good thing. And I think every religious group, every social group has their own endings. Whether you're an American Indian or an Eskimo in Alaska, all the groups have a final ending for those who pass away.
Yes, Minya,
I
and
think
then-
I'm sorry.
and then if Liz wants to say something after you.
I think the rituals, I know when my parents died, my father died first, so that my mother was in charge of what rituals she wanted to do. But when my mother passed away, then it was up to my sister and myself. And we did the rituals that we thought she would have wanted. So it really was more thinking that this is a comfort for her, knowing that we will do it, but not personally for myself. It was more, I knew this is what she wanted, so we did it.
And how do you feel about that now?
I don't know. I'm looking at this list and I'm thinking of things like covering the mirrors and sitting on the little boxes that you get when you're sitting Shiva.
Oh, you did that stuff?
Yep.
And was there any meaning for that for you?
No, just that I was doing it to memorialize my mother. I did it for her.
All right, well, it seems pretty simple to cover a mirror if that's what your mother wanted, that doesn't cause any harm.
That's what I figured. It wasn't anything harmful. It wasn't anything I had to do. We were sitting Shiva anyway, so we might as well do the things that were expected, like covering the mirrors.
Okay. Liz?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, sitting Shiva is usually telling funny stories about the person, or remembering, having good memories, which I think is really helpful for everybody, especially the people closest to them. But I think the rituals, I mean, even saying the mourner's Kaddish or lighting the candle, I mean, I've had cats who've died, and we we go through those things, and to me it makes a huge difference knowing just that I said that prayer. So very important.
Yes, and last week I had a guy that had lost his wife and another guy that had lost his dog, and I greeted them both at the beginning of the service as people who'd suffered a loss. I didn't want to say, you know, that in one case it was a dog because that might offend somebody, but the guy that lost a dog, he was very, very broken up, as you can understand. And, you know, it was just very sad, very terrible loss for him.
Member of his family.
Yeah. Are there new rituals that we might engage in that might make us feel better or help us? You don't only want to feel better, right? If somebody died, you want to get out the mourning. So maybe it's sometimes better to feel worse now so that you can, because the goal is in 11 months or a year later to be able to move on. So if you don't feel bad, maybe you can't move on later. So, but are there new rituals that we might consider that are not included in our traditional list? Yes, Marcia.
Oh,
I'm wondering if
what do you call
our
it
new
when
social internet stories,
somebody in a
things,
fire?
Facebook and Instagram, whatever, people share on there. Sometimes I wonder why they're sharing on there. But for that generation, I think it's important that they share with their extended family, which is extended friendships and family, if you will. What do you,
Sai, you have
Unmute.
to
Sai, unmute.
unmute. And we don't, Steve, we don't have the capacity to unmute
Can you
him.
hear me?
Is, yeah.
Yes.
I was wondering about after death, whether a burial or what's the other? I'm losing the word.
Cremation.
Cremation.
Yeah, right. Is a better way for ultimate remembrance, if you will.
Well, I think when you get buried, you have a grave, and when you
Right.
get
And there's
cremated,
a
you can,
remembrance.
and when you get cremated, you can get a similar spot with a stone and stuff too, if you want, but a lot of people don't. And so,
There's a lot of romantic people who will take the dust after cremation and let it blow in the wind, things of that nature.
right, and then
So,
then
so
there's
how
no,
meaningful is it not to have a physical thing, if you
Mhm.
will, just an idea?
Right. Shirley, Donna.
Um, I don't know whether this was a custom in my husband's family. He was Jewish. His brother, when his mother died, they were all there. His brother, his father's sister, and we were together the night before the funeral, and all sitting in a living room. And it was like the good feelings went just from one to the other. And sometimes the things were a little funny and people laughed, but it brought up the good memories of his mother. And his mother was a precious lady. I loved her dearly. And, but I think that helped to soften a funeral is never a happy thing. You'd rather play tennis than go to a funeral. And so I think that kind of that night before kind of softened things a little bit for the family.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Concluding comments about mourning, about death, about remembrance, about new rituals that would maybe make us. I mean, you want to feel deeply. You want to feel deeply because that's the only way to get it out and to move on. If you repress everything, and this is not just death, this is any traumatic event, then it just sort of sticks with you forever. And you don't really want that. And so here, Judaism's playing kind of a therapeutic role. but having done the four memorial services in a little more than a week, I can barely keep from crying.
Yeah.
All right, Steve, back over to you.
It was.
Okay. You have any announcements, Rabbi, before we conclude?
Any what?
Announcements?
Well, we started our course on Jewish prayers this Monday, so it goes for the next 3 sessions, which is Monday, Thursday, and Monday, Thursday. And then we're also having an interfaith Thanksgiving service on Friday, I guess the 17th, the week before Thanksgiving. That's about it.
Let us conclude then with a blessing. By the way, I will be sending the reminder either this afternoon or tomorrow, and then the day before we have our Torah study. So I hope that works out for everyone.
I would like to ask, are you going to be giving the scriptures out earlier? It's probably because maybe I didn't find it, but I didn't find the scriptures for today on my screen on my computer until then. Will that be given out maybe like 5 or 6 days beforehand to read beforehand? I
Yes.
said that because I have trouble reading, and I have macular degeneration, and I see everything fine except smaller letters. So it's difficult to read some things, like even like my scriptures. So I appreciate if that will be given out earlier.
I will do my best.
I'm sure you will. Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome. Let us conclude then with the blessing. Baruch atah
Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
haolam
asher
asher natan Torah emet Haye olam nukah v'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai Torah.
Blessed is
Adonai our God,
ruler of the
universe,
universe, has
who has
given
given
us
us
your truth and planted within us
eternal life.
Blessed is Adonai,
Adonai,
giver of the Torah.
Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, everyone, have a good rest of the week. If my illness is going to be done and I can participate some more.
Feel better.
Feel better.
Thank you. Thank
Feel
you.
better, Steve.
Thank you. Okay, the recording's stopping.